And I said, everybody, we're going to get our aggressions out right here. And there was like, yeah. And I said, but wait, another thing, I'd gone down to Home Depot and bought a little hatchet and painted it white. Had
Mhm.
one of my guys get a backhoe and dig a big hole right over there next to the parking lot. So anybody who wants to whack this thing, you got to sign your name on this.
Yeah.
And the lesson here is that even if you have an enemy today, they might be your strongest ally tomorrow. So
Yeah.
you never want to burn that bridge. You always got to make sure that whatever the outcome is, leave your options open. Because if
Yeah.
we had done what David wanted to do and never spoke to those guys again, we never would have succeeded. That process for Rainbow's customers is going to save them $10 to $12 million this
Yeah.
calendar year over what they would pay if they had still been in. Right.
It's about what we're trying to accomplish. It's not about how you feel about that person, right? It's a you with me? I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm with you.
that's
Yeah.
exactly what you did. That was and literally doing it the way that you did it, literally burying the hatchet, okay? And making them sign it, the whole thing. That was physically important and it was mentally important and you got it done.
But, as you're sitting there doing it, you start worrying about, hey, this is kind of a lousy thing to do. And then when you look at a lot of the jobs that are in the aerospace industry, I remember another friend of ours, we were at I forget where we were watching a football game or something at a gathering at someone's house when one of the, I think it was the first Iraq war. One of the wars in Iraq happened, and there were cruise missiles blowing up over Baghdad. And she was like, "Yeah, that's our cruise missiles. I helped build."
Did you know there's a technology that's actually an app on your phone that uses sound waves to tell your brain what you want your brain to do? We had a young man that was on a guest on our podcast, the Mike Litton Experience, who had a traumatic brain injury. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. He's using NewCalm now and he's sleeping more. Go to newcalm.com, Mike15 promo code. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Mike is passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
Tom Kennedy, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. Full disclosure, your wife and I have known each other for decades. And we got into a conversation and she said, this would be cool. Tom would like, we got to get Tom on. So like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go up to today. And then we want to talk about, obviously we want to talk about all the time that you had, that you put in with the municipal water district and different, water districts, right? And then also the consulting work you're doing and your expert witness business that you're in. But thanks again for being here, bud.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. And Sherry did tell me about this, and I had heard about it previously, but then she says, "Hey, you should go on it." And I'm like, "All right."
One of my favorite people in the world, bar none. She's
Ah,
amazing.
well, mine too, as it turns out. 30
Yeah,
years
right.
this May we've been married.
How
So
many?
30,
Oh, congratulations, man. That's awesome. That's really cool.
the
We've
big
been
number.
married 31. So
Ah,
yeah,
got
it's
to beat.
yeah, it's a marathon, baby. It's a marathon,
Yeah,
right?
it's not a sprint. That's a fact. And it changes once your kids grow up and move out.
Oh,
It's
sure.
it's like, whoa, who is this person again? Because we
Yeah,
were this, and then we had this 25 years of raising kids, and then it's
yeah,
like, bing, they're gone. Like, whoa, hey, I remember
yeah,
you.
yeah. You look familiar, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's cool, buddy. So where were you born?
I was born at St. Vincent's Hospital near downtown Los Angeles.
Yeah.
My parents at the time lived in Huntington Park, which is a small suburb just southeast of downtown LA. My
Mhm.
my father and his father ran a factory in the city of Vernon, where two of my brothers still work, Kennedy Nameplate Company, and we lived there, but relocated when I was about 3 years old to Fullerton in North Orange County. Um, there was changing things going on, and then the Watts riots occurred, and
Mhm.
that was my older brothers remember watching the fires from the roof of our house, and my dad said, "You know what? Maybe I can have a little longer commute."
Mhm. Yeah. So you grew up where exactly?
I grew up most of my life in Fullerton, California, North
Got
Orange
it.
County.
Okay.
And so, I went to elementary school there and whatnot. Although my me and my brothers all went to an all-boy Catholic high school in Rosemead, California, St. Don Bosco Technical Institute, not the St. John Bosco that has sports teams. This one was
Mhm.
a technical institute where if you go there for 5 years, you get an AS degree in whatever your
Wow.
specialization is. I only went for 3 years because I was able to complete all my high school stuff and apply for colleges. And it was, the question in 1982 of whether I wanted to spend 2 more years in an all-boy Catholic school in East LA or go to live in a co-ed dorm at San Diego State. And I chose the latter.
Considering your age, I don't blame you. I don't blame you, right?
Right.
So one was keep going through the grind, the other one was party time, right? It's like, come on now.
Well, I was focused on getting an aerospace engineering degree. When I was a young kid, about 5 years old, I remember watching some of the Apollo
Yeah.
moonshots, right? As we all watched back then in the late 60s. And I said to my dad, as all of us did, I want to be an astronaut when I grow
Yeah.
up. And he said, and he was just said it kind of offhand, I think, at the time. Well, you're going to need to be an aeronautical engineer, was what they would call there.
Mhm.
And at age 5, I said, well, damn it, I'm going to become an aeronautical engineer. And throughout my whole childhood, it was really strange. Of all the different partying and everything else that I did, I was focused on becoming an aerospace engineer. I was very interested in everything science and space related. Part of it also I came from a very heavily Catholic upbringing.
Mhm.
And the whole concept of heaven and eternity and heaven's up there in the stars. And I wanted to understand it. I wanted to, hey,
Mhm.
where is that? How do I figure it out? And astronomy and space related things were a big focus of mine. And throughout grade school, I always tried to focus on the technical and scientific classes. Then in high school, I was drafting and design. That was my
Mhm.
major at my technical high school. And then focused on getting an aerospace engineering degree, which I eventually did in the late 80s. It's strange to look back at a 6-year-old kid putting together a life path, but in a strange bit of I guess stick to itiveness.
Mhm.
I focused on it, got it done. It wasn't easy
Right.
because I'm a smart guy, but I also had a social life. And aerospace engineering school is difficult at San Diego State. They got us in the room originally. Our first meeting, we were freshmen. They say, look around the room, count all the people here. 3/4 of you will not graduate from this program. It's basically a
Wow.
weed out program because it was very, obviously it's challenging. I'm sure it's not easier now, but we didn't have computers like they do now and
Yeah.
things like that. You did a lot of hand
Yeah,
calculation,
you did.
and it was rigorous. I mean, I remember my last semester coming up. I was getting ready to graduate, and I met with a graduate advisor, the graduation advisor, and they said, "Hey, look at this. If you switch 2 classes, you could be a math major." And I go, "Wait a minute, I don't want to be a math major. I want an aerospace engineering major."
Mhm.
But that's how detailed the math was. I look back at now I still have all my notes and textbooks. I kept them all because I was just focused on those things. And I look at this stuff now and I go, man, I could never do this today. But it was helpful.
That's cool, man. So
Yeah.
are you digging this SpaceX thing?
Yeah, with all thoughts of Elon Musk, and I have two different theories on that guy because he's crazy on one side but genius on the other. I'm
Yeah.
totally focused on it. I watched every single one of the first probably 200 launches of that because in the 80s, when we were doing, one of my specializations was flight mechanics and propulsion. And so
Mhm.
looking at rockets, and I wanted to work in the rocket business, right?
Mhm.
And but the cost of space flight was prohibitive because they're single use devices.
Right.
And we would posit to our professors back then, and we said, hey, why don't we figure out how to land them like Buck Rogers did in the 30s, and all these, sci-fi thing while you land, and they say, nah, it's impossible. You can never do it. You can never control it. And realistically, back then, with the speed of computers and the way the avionics worked, they didn't have the ability to measure and control the surfaces needed to do that
Right.
back then. There just wasn't the computing horsepower to do it. And so now there is. And so when I first saw them trying to do it, and failing spectacularly to begin with, I was transfixed by that. And I've read all the SpaceX books on it, the history of SpaceX, and fascinating to watch a private company go about doing that. And then recently with the big ship, the Starship, watching
Mhm.
it get caught by the chopsticks was just amazing. And it's just, I remember the first time I saw two of them land when a Falcon Heavy landed at two of them in Florida at once. I almost cried because it was
Yeah.
like, man, this is amazing. And say what you want about, the political leanings and whatnot about the guy. He sure got stuff done. And so you got to tip your cap to Elon Musk on that side.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I bet it was emotional because, you spent all that time, blood, sweat, and tears, the whole thing to earn that degree. It's been something you've loved since you were 5, right? And then to watch all this happen, it's got to be moving, man. It's got to be. So
Yeah.
it moved me, and I'm fascinated by space flight, but not nearly as much as you are, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's I have a book that is college is on the fundamentals of astrodynamics, and it's where you learn orbital dynamics and how to get a rocket to go where you want to do. And it has a whole chapter, and we'd have questions on this on ballistic missile targeting.
yeah,
And there's a whole thing on there, right? They give us a homework question, say you're going to be launching from this place, and you're trying to hit that place. You've got a rocket like this. Where do you aim it, and how do you do it? And we'd have to do all the math to get it to land there, which was from a mathematical and perspective interesting. But as you're sitting there doing it, you start worrying about, hey, this is kind of a lousy thing to do. And then when you look at a lot of the jobs that are in the aerospace industry, I remember another friend of ours, we were at I forget where we were watching a football game or something at a gathering at someone's house when one of the, I think it was the first Iraq war, one of the wars in Iraq happened, and there were cruise missiles blowing up over Baghdad. And she was like, yeah, that's our cruise missiles. I helped build that. And I'm like, it's a strange thing to celebrate a work accomplishment when you do it well, a bunch of people die on the other side.
yeah,
And so, while I was willing to work in that space, I never did, but my whole goal was to work for JPL or NASA or something like that, as opposed to Raytheon or somebody who was going to, their primary objective is to be as efficient as you can at killing people, which, obviously there are certain times when war comes and that's necessary, but there's a moral conundrum that
yeah.
accompanies it, I imagine,
Kind
for
of
all.
bittersweet, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you're getting paid, but then you're like, wow, if I do well, other people are on the losing end of that battle. So, um, unfortunately, when I got out of college, the Cold War just ended, and
Yeah,
so, there was nobody hiring aerospace
yeah,
engineers, and I tried to get on programs here and there. I'd go to apply everywhere. Spent a couple years trying to get work. The whole while working as the plant engineer for my father's factory in Vernon,
yeah.
which my grandfather had worked at, and my dad and two of my brothers still do. And so I never got hired on that, any of those things. I was hired for the B2 program out in Lancaster, and they said, "Yeah, you're hired. We're hiring a bunch of people. We're going to expand. Congress is going to approve this thing. So as soon as they approve this project, this next tranche of funding, you're in." So I'm
Yeah.
great. And they say it'll be a couple weeks. So I spent the next 2 weeks watching C-SPAN, watching Congress work and going, and they eventually didn't approve it because at that point they were downsizing. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I don't know that watching these bozos at work, I don't know I
Mhm.
ever want to be dependent on these guys for
Isn't
my
that the
job,
truth?
my livelihood, because they could pull the plug on you at any moment. And the rationale that they use for decision making isn't super rational,
Right.
as we've all seen with Congress. So I was not super excited about that as a career prospect, because and it does seem that when you talk to people in the business, that you'll be on a program, be great for 5 or 6 years, and then boom, it gets just whacked, and then you're looking again. And that wasn't what I was really focused on.
Yeah. No, I understand. Hey, by the way, Walter Isaacson wrote a biography about Elon Musk. Have you had a chance to read it?
I haven't read that one yet. No, there was
If you
another
get a
book I thought of
chance,
here
I
from
highly
Tyler.
recommend it.
Yeah, there's a book called Liftoff by a guy named Eric Berger, who worked for SpaceX at the time, that goes through the very early stages and watching these guys bootstrap it in a very fateful launch they had out in the Pacific Atoll when they were just about to lose their funding. And if it didn't succeed, they were going to be toast. And they worked out a stage separation issue and got that sucker to orbit. And that the rest was history.
That's actually in the book.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. It was a big moment for them when
Yeah.
they were, bootstrapped, little company trying to do something. And you look at United Launch Alliance and some of the big boys out there, Boeing. They have terrible trouble getting anything into space, and I think it's
Yeah.
because the way the federal government goes about doing things.
Yeah.
They go out doing things with all these immense specifications, with these cost plus contracts where these guys, there's no incentive for them to do better. There's actually incentive for them to do worse because
Mhm.
the project gets delayed, they just get more money. And you
Yeah.
watch how they just fall all over themselves and come with these big bloated projects. Sure, as SpaceX is developing it, they blow a few more things up, but they're iterating so much faster and at such a more dynamic pace that the level of innovation they're able to achieve in a shorter period of time is remarkable.
And it's their leader too. I have to be honest with
Oh,
you. As
yeah, he's pushing it.
crazy as crazy as he can be,
Yeah,
right? Or look, he's also really smart and he knows how to get things done.
there's no doubt about that.
I mean that you got to read this book because you will not believe some of the measures he goes to
Yeah,
in his life to make Tesla work, to make
all right.
SpaceX work, to make, right? It's
I've
like
got Tesla solar panels on my roof right
yeah,
above me.
he
Sure.
has this way about him where he knows how to get it done and he knows how to empower the people around him to get it done. And it's just I mean, I thought a lot of him before I read the book. Afterwards, I was like, man, this guy is something. He's
Yeah, and then
really
whenever you're
something.
a dynamic, hard charging leader, you both get things done, but you also, inevitably rub some feathers the wrong
Oh,
way
sure.
along the way, and
Yeah,
that's
you're gonna ruffle
I've
feathers.
experienced
Yeah.
that in my leadership roles and different things where I'm trying to push stuff through and people are resisting. And at a certain point, I have to say, well, guess what? This is where we're going.
Right.
So we're all in this canoe together. You can either row the way I'm telling you to row, and but if you don't want to row, then get off the damn canoe.
Right. You got a life vest, swim to shore, right?
That's however,
You're out of here. So,
sure.
okay, so if it's okay, let's go back just a bit because I've got a
Sure.
couple of questions for your earlier life. So,
Mhm.
when you were growing up in Fullerton area, what was your favorite thing about growing up there?
Well, when we lived there, we lived in North Orange County before it was fully developed, and
Yeah.
so nearby us was cornfields and other sorts of agricultural fields and orange groves, where when you're a kid in the '70s, you get on your bike and you're just gone.
Yeah.
I have six brothers and a sister, and so we were, I don't want to say feral, but with two parents, my dad at work, just my mom trying to keep track of eight kids, and
Yeah.
they were all boys and one girl born 1 year apart.
Oh,
Between
wow.
1960 and 1969, my mom had eight kids, no twins,
Wow.
and she's a saint. God bless
Yeah.
her. And so we were largely self-managed. It wasn't quite Lord of the Flies, but in the morning you say, "Go, get out and go play it." And there were no computers, and there was three
Mhm.
channels on a little black and white TV. That isn't what you did. You went out and did stuff, and we'd make
Mhm.
stuff. We'd modify bicycles to do different things, build ramps and jumps, and then just go cruise around and ride down to the railroad tracks or go over to Laguna Lake, which wasn't far away. And back then we lived close enough to Disneyland in the summertime when the fireworks went off. That was when you knew to go home. We'd be
Mhm.
out there with our friends doing stuff, and then all of a sudden the fireworks go up and everybody go, "Oh crap," jump on their bikes and ride home because that's when you were supposed to be home. And so it was one of those things where you were always just trying to create things to do
Yeah.
and travel around in your local area, which then there was guys would ride motorcycle dirt bikes around in this cornfield where they had a little
Mhm.
track they made, and the guy didn't really care. And I know my brother broke his leg there at once, and we had a tree house and all that kind of stuff, so it was really dominated by that sort of stuff. My family was also into 4-H, so we had animals that we raised: pigs, goats, sheep, um, chickens. I was the 4-H guy who did small engines and electronics projects. I have from 1974 in my garage a blue ribbon panel of wire splicing I did when I was 10 years old that
Hmm.
I submitted because I was the guy who was thinking about electronics and building things mechanically as opposed to
Mhm.
agriculturally, where some other family were more focused on that stuff. But we made do with what we had. We were definitely not a wealthy family. I mean, well, I got Pell Grants to get into college because we didn't
Mhm.
have enough money, but it was dominated by something completely different than what kids grow up with today, for sure.
Yeah. So, growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Boy, it's hard to say. I think in my early days, it would have been some of my older brothers. In my late teens, I became connected with my mother's youngest brother, John, my uncle John, who who also shared an interest in astronomy. But he also, when I was 16 years old, I ran across him at a wedding, and for one of my aunts was getting remarried or something, and he's an interesting guy. He was a hippie that had left. You know, my mother was a 50s oriented. He was a 60s oriented person. I think
Mhm.
he was only 12 years younger than I was, so he was like 14 years younger than my mom. Um, he's 12 years older than I was, but he had lived in a teepee on BLM land for a while with his wife, but then when they had a kid, they built a small house. He bought a small lot up in the mountains above Palm Springs, and had was living on in this small building that they had built, you know, maybe 10 by 20, but wanted to build a proper house. And this would have been 1979, 1980. And I mentioned to him I was in high school as a drafting student. He says, "Hey, can you help me out with the drawings?" And I'm like,
Ooh.
"Sure." And so he gave me some yellow notepad sketches of what the layout should be. And I went home, got out my mechanical drafting table, because
Mhm.
that's what we all had back then, and drew up a set of house plans for him for submittal to the city county Riverside building department. And sure enough, put it all together, submitted it, got one round of plan check corrections, and got my first set of house plans approved at age 16. And
Wow, how
so,
cool was that?
yeah, it was, you know, I didn't have any knowledge to say I couldn't do it, and I've always had a spirit of, hey, I don't know if I can do it or not, but I will never know if I don't try.
Right.
And I didn't see any reason why I couldn't, because I knew how to draw the lines, and I knew I'd been studying that. And so we did it. And then I actually got out a chance to help him build the house. And me
Wow.
and my brother would go out. I was a member of the Orange County Astronomers back then, and they had my mom and he at that time had some different opinions, because he had long hair and came from the hippie generation, and she was much more conservative than that. But the Orange County Astronomers had a dark sky site where, you know, I was a teenager, but I was an astronomy nerd, right?
Mhm.
And so we told my mom, yeah, we're going out to the OCA thing for a star party. But then we'd go about 20 miles past it to my Uncle John's house and hang out for the
Mhm.
weekend and help him build it and whatnot. And I learned a ton mechanically, but he also gave me a lot of my dad wasn't super present in our lives, and we had 8 of us, so you didn't get, even if he was totally present, I'd only get 1/8 of a dad.
Right.
And so he didn't have a lot of life advice for me. He had some alcohol issues as a younger person. He's long past now, but my Uncle John filled some of that role to try, as I was making that transition from being a kid into young adulthood, to give me some different perspectives,
Yeah.
and also um, give me some things to do that were different than what had done before, like helping him
Mhm.
build a house. And then here's how we go about doing that. And then he also lived in a very dark place. So for until he passed away, when I had small kids, I didn't, but I went out there almost every new moon for probably 15, 16 years to bring my telescope. I had another telescope that I left out there, and we would dabble in astronomy and astrophotography, going back into the 80s when we were doing it on film. Nothing like what I do today, but and he was also a musician, which I am
Mm.
as well. My mother was a music teacher. All my brothers, we all played one or more instruments, and we also liked to golf. And so in 1990, we were sitting around. He wasn't a wealthy man. I didn't have any money, but we wanted better amps, better telescopes, and more better golf equipment. So we founded a nonprofit called the Golfing Astronomer Musicians Association in 1990, as a way just to hold star parties and maybe raise some money and have the club buy a telescope that we could use and bring around.
Mhm.
And it was just kind of a joke to begin with. But then, you know, within about 6 months, we had 100 members. And we were holding these star
Wow.
parties where 150 people would show up. We go way out to Corn Springs, out near Desert Center, in between like Indio and Blythe in the wintertime in the desert there. It's amazing. And we're like, hey, this is crazy. And then we were at one of our star parties, and a child of one of my other friends fell out of a tree and broke her arm. And I'm like, oh man, this is becoming a liability issue for me. So then I incorporated it into a 501(c)(3), because I'm like, this has got all the money goes into my bank account, or the bank account that has my social security number on it. And I do not need my listing to become a liability. So
Right.
we formed Gamma then, and we held golf tournaments and star parties for 6 or 7 years. By then I was starting to have young kids, and I didn't have much time. So I handed out some other people to run. And I think it ran for about 10 or 15 years before everybody finally faded away. But it was an interesting process to organize something like that, to go through the legal process of getting it done
Mhm.
through the Secretary of State and the IRS stuff, and then also to try to run a functioning organization as much as we could. That was our motto was we put the party back in Star Party. But because a lot of astronomy educators and a lot of astronomers are very stoic and
Yeah.
staid. And what we would do is we would have a little jam session and a barbecue, and people could bring tambourines and music, and we'd play some music. And then as it got darker, we'd go out, and little kids running around wasn't a problem, because a lot of star parties you'd go to, everybody's like, you got to be silent, you got to, everybody has to be, under control completely, and it's really hard for younger people to manage that. And so we were a little, let's say, looser. We weren't there with anybody with super serious intentions. We were there more about astronomy outreach and helping people enjoy the night sky than to sit there and be super serious and rigorous, which at the time, some of the like OCA and some of the other ones were not super accommodating for people who weren't like-minded as they are. But we realized that everybody who comes to these things comes from a different space, pun intended. And we wanted to be able to reach them where they were, as opposed to trying to make them comport with our requirements for participation. So that's how it worked out.
That's cool, man. So what instrument did you play, or do you play?
Well, I was when I was young, I had an underbite, so they told me to play the clarinet. And I learned the clarinet for a while, and I didn't, then I said, no, that's not cool enough. So I learned the saxophone. My mother was a cellist, and so she taught me how to play cello. In junior high school, I was playing saxophone in the junior high school band, but then they found out that I could play cello as well, and they said, well, we want you to play in the orchestra as well. And I'm like, well, hey man, that's two periods. I can't do that. They said, well, we'll get you out of whatever class you want. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I played cello in the orchestra and saxophone in the band. But then as I became older, my brother was an accomplished musician and electric guitarist at the time in the 70s. And now he became a computer programmer all day, but he still produces music and had a band in the 90s that was, had some small amount of success. But I picked up electric bass because one of my other brothers plays drums.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, well, we need a bass player. And it had four strings, just like a cello. And so I picked that up. My mother, when she heard that, had me go sit down with a woman named Marilyn Malin, who was a classical bassist, and taught me to play bass on Bach and things like that. And I'm like, no, I want to play the Pretenders and,
Right.
these other types of bands, in the late 70s, early 80s. But she taught me the classical ways to do it, but I then immediately forgot all that and just turned on a record and learned how to play it. And so I've been doing that. My son plays drums, and when he lived here, we on Friday nights we play drum and bass in the garage and make a racket for the neighbors, and we have a good time. Actually in the early '80s. No, hold on. Yeah, that would have been in the early '80s. My brothers and I, during Christmas holidays, would get together and we called the Live Kennedys, as a play on the dead Kennedys.
Did you know there's an app that has no side effects that allows you to use sound waves to tell your brain what you want it to do? It's called newcalm.com, and it's amazing. It literally uses sound waves. If you want to tell your brain to go to sleep, if you want to tell your brain to recover, if you want to tell your brain to put you in peak physical state, if you want to tell your brain to focus, if you want to tell your brain to take a power nap, you can do all of these things and more with newcalm.com. Go to newcalm.com today, promo code Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go there today. Mm-hmm.
And we played a couple gigs at different people's, garage type gigs, just doing some stuff that we made up on the fly, just as fun. And every now and then, my uncle's when my uncle John passed, there was a kind of a memorial concert because he's a musician, and we reformed for that one about, gosh, it was like 10 or 12 years ago. But it's been a lifelong thing for me. I have there's probably can't see it. There's a guitar behind me, but I mainly play bass. I can't play. I've tried to learn how to play guitar forever, and I just can't do it.
Oh, that's cool. Well, there's, like you said, similarities between the cello and the bass, right? So you
Yeah.
sort of had classical training ahead of time. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So in high school, I think I know the answer to this already, but in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Well, physics.
Okay.
was one of them, but also drafting and design. I like because I was trying to move my way toward becoming an engineer, an aerospace engineer, so I knew I needed to have those skills. At least back then, CAD was just coming around, but we
Yeah.
were all still manually doing everything. Back in the late '70s, early '80s, CAD was something that was out there, but nothing like it is today. And so those are the main things. I think the main thing I wanted to do was get the heck out of there because it was a pretty oppressive place. I, I, you know, there was a Ramona convent was the girls' school down the road, and they would be act as cheerleaders for our team, and I was on the volleyball team back then, and we didn't have football or anything like that, and so they'd be our cheerleaders, and me and one of the other guys on the volleyball team dated a couple of them, but every now and then they'd bring the Ramona convents coming for a visit. We're like, everybody's like, wow, and you're a 15-year-old boy, 16-year-old boy. You're like, cool. They'd bring them there, but they wouldn't let you talk to them. And we're like, what is the purpose of this torture? Why do you bring all these girls here and tell
Right.
us they have to stand on that side of the grass and we have to stand on this side of the grass? It was some sort of crazy torture, but it was it was in East LA, so it was a long drive, and it was an all boy Catholic school, which uh, disconnected me from some of my local friends and things like that. So it was difficult. So I had kind of this social group that was in the local high school, the people I'd grown up with, and then these other guys that were 30 miles away. But I did meet some interesting people there. I had a girlfriend through most of high school, and but had to drive out to East LA to visit. And but it was a completely different environment for people who lived in Monterey Park or in those sorts of places than in Fullerton.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you have a favorite teacher in high school?
I would have to say Mr. Uchida, who was a physics teacher, also did chemistry,
Mhm.
was probably my favorite teacher. But I don't I don't remember a lot of them though.
I got you. I got you. So after you all finished that house for your uncle,
Mhm.
how did you feel?
Well, there was a certain element of amazement that I even
Mhm.
did it, but it was great because they had been living in this little, I don't want to say a shack, but it was a timber framed house, but it was very small, 2 rooms in it, right?
Mhm.
Didn't have indoor plumbing other than a
Wow.
sink that went out. And they had what he called the out. It wasn't an outhouse, it was just an out. And it was just a box and a hole that got moved around. But he always put it in a place with an amazing view. And up there in the mountains, he'd put it there and we'd be up there sometimes and there'd be sunset coming and everybody look at each other about who's going to make the sprint to the out for the sunset view. And
Mhm.
so to get the prime seat for sunset. And so this one, when we finally got it done, he had been able to drill a well, build a septic system, and then have a proper house. And because he ended up having 3 kids, and so there's
Mhm.
5 of them there, and obviously it was gratifying for that. And then we added on to it about 15 years later. Did another add-on, and I got to help build that. And it's I remember one time we went up when we were getting ready to do the add-on, and it's in the mountains, so there's some hard rock to get through, and it was essentially pickaxe work to clear out about 3 feet of the slope. And me and my brother and a friend went up there over a long weekend, and we were chipping away at it, but we were also drinking beer and having a
Mhm.
good time. And so we weren't the most effective workers ever. And so at the end of the weekend, I told him, I said, "Hey, John, I'm sorry, we didn't do more." And he goes, "Listen," and this is something I've told people over and over since then. It stuck with me. He says, "Listen, every shovel you took is one I didn't have to. So I appreciate whatever you did.
That's it.
Yeah, there's 48 beer cans all over the ground. Here's you got to pick those up.
Right.
But the fact that you guys chipped 1 foot away from that and not 3 feet is one less foot that I've got to do. And so I think
Yeah.
that him showing the appreciation, the effort, even though it was incomplete or not effective, showed a way that you should appreciate everything that people might give or give for
Yeah.
you, irrespective of whether you wanted more or not.
Well, it cost him 2 cases of beer, but he was okay with it,
Oh
right?
no, no, we had to bring our own beer.
He didn't even cater the party? Come on,
No,
man.
no, 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 no. Well, the Kennedy brothers were known for being able to put away a very large amounts of beer. Although these days, not so much. Of course, beer today with the IPAs, it's about triple the alcohols. That stuff we were drinking back then.
Yeah, it
You had
is.
to really work.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. So you choose to go to San Diego State. You
Right.
get your degree in aerospace engineering, which is big time cool, right?
Mhm.
Where do you go after San Diego State?
Well, I'll tell you another funny San Diego State story since we're starting at the beginning. I wanted to go to MIT or Caltech,
Yeah.
but my parents didn't. We didn't have the money for that, and so my older brothers had all gone north to UC Santa Barbara.
Mhm.
I wanted to have a separation because I remember the first day I went to Bosco Tech to take the entrance exam. I'm sitting there with a bunch of other, middle schoolers taking the exam, and then we're waiting around. And the head priest with a phalanx of brothers and deacons come walking through the crowd, and it parts the crowd. And I kind of start shifting over. And he comes over and he beelines it to me and he goes, "Mr. Kennedy, it's good to see you." And I'm like, why does this guy know who I am? Well, my brothers had a certain reputation there of maybe not being the most well-behaved students there, and one of them had been expelled. And so I'm like, dang it! Everywhere I went, I was that guy who was the younger brother of those other four
Yep.
guys that came
Yep.
before me.
Yep. And it
So I
was a
said,
little
well, they
cold
went
in that
north.
shadow.
I'm going south. I got to have a clean slate here. I've been
Yeah.
following these guys, the wake of these guys forever. So I applied to UC San Diego and San Diego State,
Yeah.
got accepted to both. Then my mom and I came down to visit the campuses to take a look. And so we're going over, and first we stop at UC San Diego. And if I'm not sure how familiar you are with where it is, it's right there near La Jolla, beautiful
Mhm.
area. But when you're there and you're a 17-year-old kid who doesn't own a car and just has a single speed beach cruiser bike, you go there and you look at it and you go, well, this is a beautiful campus, but boy, there's a lot of hills.
There's hills everywhere. Yeah.
There's nothing there. The closest supermarket or 7-Eleven is like miles away down this huge hill.
Yeah.
It's overcast. It's cold. All the girls are bundled up and all that. And I've been at an all boy Catholic school for 3 years. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, And so then we're like,
Bundled
well,
up
that's
girls
nice and
doesn't
all.
work with the equation.
Right. And
It's
so
not
so we
exactly
go
a recruiting
we
thing.
we go 20 miles east to San Diego State. And the sun's out, and
Yeah.
there's the dorm, and there's
Yeah.
the 7-Eleven, there's a pizza joint, there's a video game arcade
Yeah.
right there.
This place
And
rocks.
but they
They're in their
also
sundresses, let's be honest.
oh yeah, but they also have the observatory, and I was interested in the Mount Laguna Observatory, and
Yeah.
as a being a young amateur astronomer, that interested me too. San Diego State's a little more of an applied engineering school.
Yeah.
Like they have the high pressure wind tunnel that the guys from UC would come borrow. UC's more theoretical, but I was totally interested in the girls,
Yeah.
but I told my mom, "Well, mom, San Diego State's a better applied engineering school because I
Mhm.
think I'll go there." And so I did, and it did work out because I did later on. I got a job as a draftsman at San Diego State
Mhm.
in the physical plant, and part of what we did was program maintenance. And I had a part of the thing was that we used to do infrared surveys of the roofing of different buildings
Mhm.
to see if there was any leaks or you could see temperature differentials. Back then, they didn't have infrared cameras you could hold in your hand. Back then, it was a 40-pound backpack with a
Mhm.
VHS tank that I'd have to go to the physics building and get some liquid nitrogen to put in cool the sensor, climb up a ladder to get on the roof, and I was the strong enough guy to do it and do that. But then I realized when I was doing that, I said, "Hey," because back then we were just then coming to grips with the effects of atmospheric turbulence on
Mhm.
astronomical facilities. I said, "Hey, let me take this up to the observatory." And my boss was like, "That thing costs like $20,000. We're not going to let you take it up there." And so he says, "Well, I'll ask." And then I asked the astronomy professors. I was a guy who in college took astrophysics twice as an elective, two different
Mhm.
levels. As I could have taken basket weaving, but I was interested in astrophysics, so I did.
Right.
And so I talked to them, and they said, "Yes, we'd love to have that done." And so through the university, they agreed to let me and my buddy Larry put it in his Honda Civic, drive it up to Mount Laguna, and start doing infrared surveys on the outside of the building and within the observatory structure itself. And we identified a number of heat sources that were diminishing their images. So if you're looking over a barbecue, you see the airwaves going like this.
Mhm.
When you're really high magnification and really big instruments, even subtle things like they had rolled these big boulders around the observatory building as decorative items, but they were
Mhm.
just heat sinks that were just radiating heat out and reducing the quality of the imaging and the data they were collecting. And so it was pretty cool to go out and do that, and then I got invited back up when they, were showing off my work. I didn't get any credit for it in any way, but it was an interesting process. So that's the San Diego State story in a nutshell.
So the boulders heat up during the day and then
Right,
they emanate heat at night.
right,
And that disturbance to the air, right,
right. Yep.
has an impact on what they can see. That's amazing, man. That's
Yeah,
really
if
cool.
you're, using a big telescope and you're
Yeah,
looking at very fine stuff, and
yeah,
atmospheric turbulence is a problem in all astronomical stuff, and you want to eliminate as many variables as you can,
yeah.
and don't include self-imposed ones, right?
Right, yeah. For
My little
decorative reasons,
observatory in
right?
the backyard is made out of wood.
Yeah,
Wood will absorb the heat during the day, but it'll lose it very quickly.
yeah.
Stone, heat, like they made brick walls on that,
Mhm,
and the walls of that building were radiating. So later they painted with some insulating paint so that it wouldn't absorb so much heat during the day, so
mhm,
you could do it. There were preload motors on the thing that weren't insulated. That were just inside the observatory, just baking, like glowing red and infrared.
mhm.
And so it was interesting, and it was something that was, the technology to measure those things, infrared cameras. Like I said, this thing weighed 40 pounds and you had liquid nitrogen. It wasn't a, nowadays you get these infrared cameras, you can buy them at Harbor Freight for,
Yeah,
for goodness sake. So,
gotcha.
but 40 years ago, that really wasn't the case.
That's cool. So where do you go after San Diego State?
So I graduate college, and I moved back up to LA. I moved in with my brother. We lived in La Mirada, and I started working as the plant engineer for my dad. That was his
Mhm,
job. I said, "Hey, I just need a placeholder job," and he goes, "For sure. You don't. There's no space for you to be here your whole career, and you don't want to be here." And I said, "On that, we agree." He
mhm,
paid me $5 an hour to be the
mhm.
plant engineer, and I worked there at the plant the whole while applying for different places. And like I said earlier, I applied all around in aerospace. At one point, I'm just like, I got to get out of here. I'm making $5 an hour, and my dad did this, my granddad did this, my brother's going to do this, but I don't want to do this. So
Right.
at one point, I applied for a job as an energy analyst for the city of Vernon, which had its own power company. City of Vernon's
Mhm,
a 5 square mile city. The motto is exclusively industrial, right near downtown LA. Like 25th and Alameda streets are in the city of Vernon. That's
mhm,
the northeastern corner of it. And so I didn't get that job, but I got a call later for an engineering aide position. I
mhm,
go, all right, well, what's it pay? They go, $12 an hour. Come in for an interview. They were focused on the things I'd done at San Diego State, where I'd worked as a draftsman in the physical plant and the program maintenance department, where San Diego State had cogeneration systems, big HVAC systems, and the other industrial cooling and heating systems for campus wide that I had done drawings on and been around and become familiar with. And they say, "Yeah, we'd like to give you a shot." And I'm like, $12 an hour. Yes. So I took
mhm.
the job the day one, walking in the door. I had no idea what I was going to do specifically. My
Yeah.
title was engineering aide. And I'm like, sure. It's a much bigger paycheck than I was getting. And
Mhm.
it turned out they hired me to be a plumbing and mechanical inspector in the building department. The building department there is different than the ones that you have in most cities, which is looking at housing and whatnot. It's exclusively industrial. So
Yeah.
when you're looking at plumbing and mechanical being HVAC, you're looking at big industrial refrigeration
Right.
systems. You're looking at big wastewater systems and wastewater
Major
treatment
stuff. Yeah.
systems. Farmer John was a big, they're gone now, but they were
Mhm.
the big slaughterhouse and a series of other slaughterhouses, rendering plants, Alcoa Aluminum, huge industries, textile, dyeing houses. And so I was schooled in becoming a plumbing inspector and a
Mhm.
mechanical inspector and learned a ton. I learned very early on, and I've given this advice to dozens of younger people. Find the people who've been doing this for a lot and ask a lot of questions and listen to the answers,
Yeah.
because you can learn it all the hard way yourself, and that's
Mhm.
fine. But there's other people who've already learned the hard way,
Mhm.
and you might think they're old school or they're outdated or whatnot. But hey, there are certain facts that transcend generations that are things that you can learn. And so I
Mhm.
would sit there and at lunch, I wouldn't hang out with the guys my age. I'd go sit with the old guy in the room and pepper him with questions. Say,
Yeah.
"Hey, what's this about? What's that about? Who's that? What do they do?" And just be inquisitive. And so I had done industrial wastewater permit for my family's factory because we had a small wastewater thing, and I had built a little wastewater treatment system for it. And so they gave me the industrial wastewater pretreatment program at City of Vernon, which was probably the most intense industrial wastewater space in Southern California.
Mhm.
And so I learned a ton going around and talking to different plant engineers and whatnot, and doing that. And so I took that on in addition to my other duties. Then the guy who was running the sewer collection system was getting ready to retire. I had hung out with him at lunch a bunch, and he said, "Hey, why don't we give Kennedy a shot?" And so I'm like, "Sure." And so I rode along with him, part time as he was getting ready to retire. And then when he retired, I took over the sewer collection system. And wastewater in the city of Vernon is, and I've run wastewater systems around different places and been all over the world looking at wastewater systems. This is the most unique one ever because it included certain very old portions of the city of LA system before the
Mhm.
Hyperion plant was done that were concrete bottom brick oval structures that were built
Mhm.
100 years ago to some newer stuff, but the type of wastewater you got was just incredible. The amount of fats and grease that come out of slaughterhouses. I remember one time, I don't want to offend anyone, but the wastewater is wastewater. We all need
Mhm.
wastewater people to make it go away.
Right.
And industrial wastewater is very challenging because there are certain things that an industry could put in the wastewater system that will damage the treatment plants. Wastewater
Right.
is treated through biological mechanisms, and if you put chemicals in there that kill the bugs in your wastewater treatment plant, your whole plant goes belly up. And so we have
Right.
to make close control on what's going in and out of the wastewater system. But one time, my guys called me out by Farmer John, where we would clean that line with a big jetter truck every week, which is most places do it once a year at most, but we do it every week. They say, "You got to come see this." I go, "What do you mean? I'm busy." They go, "No, no, no. You got to just tell me." They're like, "Nope, you got to come see this one." So I drive on out to Farmer John, and there's this manhole cover, which are weigh 80 or 100 pounds, sitting there,
Mhm.
kind of jiggling on the road surface. Which the only time I've ever seen a manhole cover above the surface of the road is when water's spraying out of it.
Right.
Like, "What's that?" And they pull it up, and that thing is chock full of the top with pig lungs. I'm like, "What the heck?" And then so I go, "Well, I think I know where these came because there
Right.
was one place that killed 6,000 pigs a day. It
Right.
was right there."
Right.
So I call Reed Delphi, who was a plant engineer at Farmer John at the time. I said, "Hey, Reed." "Yeah, Tom, what's going on?" "Hey, you gotta come out here and see this." He goes, "Man, I'm busy." "No,
Yeah.
no, 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 no.
No,
You
you got
gotta
it.
come
No,
out
no,
and
no.
see this."
Yeah.
No, no, no. So he comes
Come
out.
on, big guy.
I pull it over, and he just then he goes, "Oh," he goes, "Yeah, I think those are ours." I go, "You think, Reed?" Uh, and so apparently they had some
Big
old pipe
mystery.
that was connected there from the 1920s that somebody had lopped off and then dumped the wrong vat in the wrong place, and it all went in our sewer line. So he had fun cleaning that out. So we saw a lot of different stuff. Later on, there I the first stormwater permit for LA County. They call them municipal. There, there's MS4 permits, but
Mhm.
they're stormwater permits that in the early '90s were the first ones. Now they're everywhere, but this was the
Mhm.
first one for LA County, and they asked me to lead them on it. So I got to be sitting there as a 25-year-old, go sit in these rooms at the LA County Public Works Department with all the different agencies around the county and start helping to derive policy for stormwater management and stormwater quality with the Heal the Bay and other environmental groups there and this kind of quasi political thing, which was an eye opener to me to interagency
Yeah.
coordination and how deals get made and these sorts of things. And a fascinating look at how the regulatory environment, when they're creating new regulations, goes about their business. And
Yeah.
I fought pretty hard for what we were doing, but it was an interesting process. So now at that point, I was doing the plumbing inspections, mechanical inspections, handling industrial wastewater, handling the wastewater system, and the stormwater program. So I had 5 jobs already, and then the guy who was running the water department decided to leave, give 2 weeks notice and leave. And they said, "All right, Kennedy, how about that one too?" I'm like, "Listen, guys, 5 jobs, sure, but the sixth, that's a bridge too far. So you're going to have
Right.
to hire someone else to take some of this other work off my hands."
You were
So,
wearing so many hats, you had neck strain. Come
but
on now.
that was advice that was given to me, I think, by Gene DeFrank, who was the old sewer guy. He says, "Listen, every now and then in an organization, there's going to be a ball spinning around the floor, and they're looking for somebody to pick it up and run with it."
Yeah.
And every time I saw a ball, I picked it up and ran with it
Yeah.
because I figured, I had faith that I wouldn't fumble it immediately because if you don't have faith, but I was like, this is how I'm going to learn and expand my
Mhm.
capabilities. Also, around that time, I was a couple years out of college and I was looking at, around the building of who's making the most money,
Yeah.
right? You got your engineers who are professional, they have engineering degrees, that's I did, but they're
Mhm.
PEs, they have civil engineering with a stamp, and that
Mhm.
stamp gives you a certain jump in your pay. But I also saw the city manager and talked to some other people. They said, "No, that job, you get a master's in public administration. And so Sherry and I talked about, should I go get it would have been an easier path just to get an engineering stamp. I'd have to take 2 classes, an exam, and move on. Or should I go to a master's in public administration, which is like an MBA? It's all
Hmm.
the classes are the same, just that public finance and some of those stuff you diverge. But I felt that that would be a broadening
Hmm.
thing for my career. And so I decided to go with the MPA program. And so back then in the early 90s or mid 90s, I started taking 1 class a semester at Cal State Fullerton, where I'd drive from the city of Vernon to Fullerton.
Hmm.
Again, before online, before anything, you had to
Hmm.
have your butt in a seat with a pencil in your hand
That's
every
right.
time there's class. And so that made it more difficult because we just got married, we're having our first kids and things like that. I didn't have time. And I hear today people go out and get these things, these online degrees in 14, 18 months. I'm like, well,
Hmm.
that just wasn't possible 30
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I worked there and I took on the water department. And then after our daughter was born, and I was looking at my grandfather, my father, my brothers had made the commute. My wife and I had bought a house in Brea, which is also in North Orange County, making the commute into the city of Vernon. I'm like, man, my dad did this his whole life. And Vernon's interesting from a technology and if you're into manufacturing things, but it's also a horrible place because it's just all industrial, right?
Yeah.
And you got to drive through East LA to get there, and it's crowded, and there's more asphalt and concrete than dirt anywhere. And
Yeah.
we wanted to live a little more semi-rural life,
Yeah.
and so we decided to find different work. And I looked at work up in the Central Coast, San Luis Obispo, Santa Maria, up that way. Wasn't finding it, and then found work at a Liebenheim Water in Carlsbad, and then we relocated to San Diego now 25 years ago.
Yeah. Wow, man. That brings us up to today.
Well, that takes us up to 1999. Anyway, I told you I was loquacious.
I'm telling you. So at some point, you decide to retire
Right.
and you decide to go into consulting. And from what Sherry was sharing with me, you're doing expert witness testimony, like you're starting to become more popular as an expert witness. Talk about consulting, but then talk about what it's like to be an expert witness. Because there are people that are listening to this that are fascinated, I guarantee you, by the idea of being an expert witness and actually testifying in court.
Yeah, I've only testified in court once. Because the way I look at it, if I do my job well, I don't. And that actually wasn't an expert witness on that case. And the one I'm working on now, that's coming, but it isn't. I think that um, you know, the challenge in expert witness work, and I was talking to another law firm just 2 weeks ago on a potential engagement related to the fires in LA, but there's uh attorneys want you to say what they want you to say.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just say what the attorney wants to say because if I've got to put my hand on the Bible, I guess I don't know if they do that anymore, but if I've got to attest that what I'm saying is true, I'm going to say it's true.
Mhm.
And so there are times when people will talk to you about an expert witness engagement and they ask you your opinions and you tell their opinions and then you never hear that back from them again.
Right.
Because and I think that I don't know that there are for a fact, but I can presume with a pretty high degree of confidence that there are people who are more malleable in what their opinions may or may not be. In a case that I'm working on now, the attorneys would say, "Hey, can we say this? Can we say that?" And I said, "Well, I reviewed all the data. You can say whatever you want.
Right.
I can't say that."
Right.
And because now, if you've got additional data or information that could draw that conclusion, I'm not working on inferences. I'm not
Right.
working on hypotheses here. I'm working
This
on
is the facts. Yeah.
these are facts that if I put out there. Interestingly, in one case I was working out, the opposing counsel is a guy I know and I've tried to hire and I've worked around, and he spent quite a bit of time trying to get my testimony thrown out. And you have to learn that because if I see that guy next, we'll talk amicably in the hallway of wherever we're at.
Mhm.
That the attorneys have a job to do, and part of their
Mhm.
job is to get your witness testimony thrown out. So they're going to say all kind of stuff, and whether they believe it or not. But and if you take that stuff personally, you
Yeah.
will have a very short career
Yeah. No kidding.
because it's part of the job. I
Yeah.
worked on a case, and when they first came to me, they was talking about a different water district, and I go, "Well, hang on, that doesn't sound right. I know the guy who runs that water district." And they go, oh, no, no, no. We have in his deposition, his opinion is closer to yours than to his board's. And, but it's, it's unusual because then you see them later and you have to talk. But mature people who've been doing this a while realize this is all just everybody's got a job to do.
Yeah.
I don't take when I've ever been in a political or otherwise controversial topic, and I have somebody who's on the other side, a different opinion, or trying to obtain a different objective. I don't take it personally because if that other agency had hired me, I'd be doing exactly what that person's doing. Well, I'd do it better. Let's just
Yeah.
say that. But so we all have our jobs to do, and the same thing goes in politics. Sometimes people say, "Well, that guy made a deal with this other dude. That's weird because they're supposed to hate each other." It's like, no, it's means to an end. A
Yeah.
lot of that kind of stuff. And so if you burn a bridge, I'll give you an example. When I was general manager at Rainbow, and I first got hired at Rainbow, another local agency in Fallbrook was trying to forcibly dissolve our agency.
Yeah. I remember that.
And so I was hired to stop that and had
Hmm.
to do everything I could to stop it. And that
Hmm.
included saying whatever I needed to say about the other guys, right?
Right.
And then at the end of it, it concluded. And it was terrible because some people get all wound up on it. And in San Diego County, we have this fourth grade water poster contest. There's calendars that every agency does. Fourth graders, we go around the schools and they submit their drawings on save water, water is life, whatever the theme is every year. And the board selects people, their kids get their stuff put in a calendar, and it's cute and it's fun. And we'd have them out on our countertop for our ratepayers to take or whatnot. And one day I walk out there and I don't see them. And I go, "Hey, what happened to the calendars? Did everybody get them all?" And they go, "Oh, no, no. David took them out of here." And I go, "What for?" They go, "We don't know. He just took them out." And I found him and say, "David, what's the deal? What's the deal with the calendar?" He says, "Oh, Fallbrook's logo's on that. And those guys, we can't have it up there. We can't. Those guys are bad." I'm like, "Listen, David, they're fourth graders, man. Get over it." So
They don't know the difference,
yeah, I mean, it's like, dude, you got to separate the fourth graders, and these kids are all happy, and their parents are proud that they've got their kids' thing and their art
Yeah.
a calendar or whatever. Just let that go. And so when we all got done and we won, we held a little barbecue party in our parking lot, and I had everybody over there, and we're all celebrating that everybody didn't lose their jobs and whatnot, especially me.
Mhm.
The because I'd been the first one to get cut. But I got this soccer ball pinata, and I put the logo of Fallbrook all around it. And I said, "Everybody, we're going to get our aggressions out right here." And there was like, "Yeah." And I said, "But wait, another thing. I'd gone down to Home Depot and bought a little hatchet and painted it white. Had
Mhm.
one of my guys get a backhoe and dig a big hole right over there next to the parking lot. Said, anybody who wants to whack this thing, you got to sign your name on this hatchet, and we are going to literally bury this hatchet today. And
Beautiful.
this is it.
Beautiful.
We are done with
Beautiful.
that
I
fight.
love that.
We're moving on." And everybody lined up and did it, and we moved on. And everybody thought, well, that's stupid. But the reality was, just a couple
No.
years later, a bigger opportunity to save money for our region came up that we just concluded by finding a new water wholesaler, which was a much harder project, but we worked hand in hand with Fallbrook on that.
Yeah.
And the lesson here is that even if you have an enemy today, they might be your strongest ally tomorrow. So
Yeah.
you never want to burn that bridge. You always got to make sure that whatever the outcome is, leave your options open. Because if
Yeah.
we had done what David wanted to do and never spoke those guys again, we never would have succeeded. That process for Rainbow's customers is going to save them $10 to $12 million this
Yeah.
calendar year over what they would pay if they had still been in. There's only 10,000 customers here. That's over
Yeah.
$1,000 a year per household.
Yeah.
And so that's significant money to save the ratepayers. But had we taken a stance of fighting forever and make those guys are bad, so we're never going to talk to them, we never would have been able to achieve that result.
I just had a conversation this morning with a very good friend of mine, and I had to tell him something very, very difficult. And that was, it's not about you.
Right,
It's about the outcome.
right.
It's about what we're trying to accomplish. It's not about how you feel about that person, right? It's a, with me. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm with you.
that's
Yeah.
exactly what you did. That was, and literally doing it the way that you did it, literally burying the hatchet, okay, and making them sign it, the whole thing. That was physically important and it was mentally important, and you got it done. And that's what is most important, man. That's leadership 101. And I hope people will remember when they listen to this episode, I hope they'll remember this lesson about leadership, and especially Tom Kennedy's leadership.
Well,
Appreciate
that's
you,
part
buddy.
of it. That's part of
Thank
it.
you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. This has been
All right.
awesome.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, buddy. Can I ask you a question? Did you know that there's a technology that uses sound waves that'll tell your brain what to do? There literally is. It's called newcalm.com. It can tell your brain to heal, tell your brain to sleep, tell your brain to do all kinds of things. It can get you fired up. It can be a pre-workout. Newcalm.com. And the promo code is Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at the Mike Litton Experience.